If you want to learn 2 ways to simplify a strength and conditioning program for athletes, this episode is going to be perfect for you. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Welcome all new listeners, and welcome back to those who have heard my content in the past. If you want to learn 2 ways to simplify a strength and conditioning program for athletes, this episode is going to be perfect for you. Before I go on to the podcast, what is new? What is better? It is absolute chaos at the moment. And what I mean by that in the best way possible is just there are so many projects and things happening in my life, which if you're new to my world, I love chaos. I love new things. I feel like it pushes you to grow. And sometimes you have to pick and choose when that chaos happens in your life, and sometimes you have no control. So at the moment, I have a lot of good things happening. My kids just started school, and it was actually very emotional to have both of them start. Some of you in the country and all over the world might say, like, well, like, why are your kids starting in summer? Our school system in California, I learned this, that not every school system in Southern California does year-round school. My kids go to year-round school, and they it is great for a couple reasons. They don't have like a whole summer off. They have times where their summer is shorter, but they have longer like winter breaks or fall breaks. So it's a good and a bad thing. So they just started, and that's very, very exciting. What is happening? I just got back from a trip with my kids and my wife. It's been good. And on the sports performance side, we just had quarterly meetings. So we meet every quarter to review everybody's progress, what's happening with the company, where are we going, where are we moving, where are we flying, and what needs to happen to get there. So it's just like a quarterly check-in. It's actually one of my favorite things to do because I love to see where everybody's at. Everybody in the company gets to contribute to innovation and growth of the company. So we came into that. That was pure fire on Tuesday, a full day event. And for those of you who missed it, I did my webinar on strength conditioning parameters for athletes on Tuesday, and it was fantastic. We had people from all over the country and world. I had somebody from India in there, and that was fantastic. And what's really excited about what like my new like vision for the Chris Garcia Academy is just seeing like the potential reach of how many people we can help because pre-COVID, virtual was, it was a thing, but not to that extent. And so the really cool part is that we're getting so many listeners and participants and attendees and people wanting to do things from all over the country. So that's been amazing for me to just be part of and extend the reach and help more people. So that is great. I have the Strength Conditioning Summit this weekend. Probably by the time you hear this podcast, you're probably at it right now, or you didn't get to attend this event. Nonetheless, if you guys are interested for the event, it is this Saturday and Sunday, July 23rd, 24th, in 2022, whenever you're listening to this. So I'm excited to do that and meet some incredible clinicians. We have clinicians from all over the country attending virtually and in person. So, all right, let's go on to the podcast. So why am I doing this? I will honestly say that after like obsessing over strength and conditioning over the last probably 4 or 5 months. And early in my career, I didn't have a lot of foundation in it, and I was the glorified HEP PT, meaning I just added more weight, or I did more reps, or I just made them do like glute sets, even like with weight, or it's like super basic stuff. And I'd have to admit that, right? Like there's so much growth in vulnerability. And so as I worked with more athletes, I figured out that working in the pro level, I wasn't designing the programs, but I had access to them, and I had to ask, like, why are you doing this? Where am I at? Am I in the preseason, the off season? Am I in season? Like, what am I doing? How can I help the best? I knew that they had to get strong and stay strong, but then my role as a physical therapist, I didn't know where I sat. I knew how to repair tissue, but the strength conditioning coach was like, well, we need to destroy the tissue right now so it becomes more resilient and stronger. But I'm like, no, 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 but don't harm them because I'm like getting them perfect and their movement's great, their stability's great. And he's like, not right now. We can't do that. Why? Because they're in season. You can't it's a different time point, or it's preseason. Like you're like we are loading the tissue so we can get them more resilient. If you stop that, they will have no base and they'll become more uh, prone to getting hurt. And I was like, it just blew my mind to put it in that terms. And so as I navigated and I talked to more strength and conditioning coaches, man, I was overwhelmed. The terms, the conditions, like it depends what percentage is here. Is it like 92.1%? Is it 94.7%? I was just so overwhelming. And so for a physical therapist, depending on what setting you're in, there's pretty much like four different types of settings that I've noticed as I mentor more physical therapists. There's like people who are in a traditional like insurance-based ortho sport type of facility, and they're looking to like keep their patients and athletes like healthier. Or well, even within that, you might have like a clinic owner or clinic director who's trying to create like wellness programs and like will help the community, but also sustain their like profitability of their company. So I totally get both sides. You might have a cash-based PT who is like, man, I really like helping my athletes, and I want to take them to that next level. They do CrossFit, they do Orange Theory, they do F45, whatever it is. And then lastly, you have the person who works in like elite sport. They're like work for a university. Taryn, who was on the webinar, somebody who works in elite sports. It was great to have that person on, and um, they work in elite sports, and so there's no really barrier to like their whole year is already mapped out, so that makes it easier. What makes it harder for the other three people in like cash-based clinic directors or traditional insurance is that we don't have a season. There's not like a year long mapped out, and that's where we have the skill set of being able to map it out is one thing, but then also two, like being able to relay that to the patient and athlete without seeming like salesy, like you're literally just genuinely trying to help. It's like for their betterment, because you as a clinician, where you're listening to me right now, you know that just getting them pain free, like that's a great feeling, but keeping them healthy in the season and stronger and like they didn't have a re-injury, that's a better feeling. And getting them pain free and keeping them pain free are two different planets, very different roles. And any clinician who ever tells you otherwise hasn't worked in elite sports or hasn't worked with high caliber athletes or hasn't worked in a continuum, a spectrum of care. Most of those people then, if you, please don't take offense to this, but if you work where you only see somebody from 4 weeks post-injury or 6 weeks post-injury to like 3 or 4 months post-injury, that's a very different subset on somebody who can then transition somebody into like performance, so who can get the 6 months to 1 year. That's a different profile. That's a different skill set. That's where you make this transition. So most people who are post-injury, we can repair the tissue. But the challenge becomes, how do you develop and strengthen the tissue so it's more resilient? How do you induce hypertrophy? How do you get strength endurance on that? How do you get them into pre-competition where you now have to help them generate power? That's a whole different subset. Getting them prepared and pain-free is one thing. Getting them strong is another thing. And getting them powerful is another subset, another skill set. So when you have all three of those variables, it becomes very challenging because your framework is that you should be doing, 12 to 15 repetitions, 4 to 5 sets at low load, high volume, low intensity. And so the more I realize this, there's two things that I think that will simplify your world as a physical therapist, wherever you are along the spectrum. If you're a new grad or you're established, you work in any four of these settings, or even if you're a business owner, clinic director, whatever it is, every one of you has to understand the basic fundamentals. It doesn't have to be like rocket science. That's not a thing. But there's two things that I think that will dramatically simplify your world and when you are designing a strength and conditioning program. So here we go. So this is off of having several deep conversations with physical therapists from all over the country on the webinar. I had a staff meeting today where we reviewed that, and this is now like to you guys and girls, because I really feel like if you can take something from this, that gives me so much joy, because a lot of times we go to CEU courses hoping it's going to fix the thing, right? That gives us the frustration, gives us the headache, gives us the imposter syndrome. And I think that there's more simplicity than taking a full CEU course. Some of it is like one or two takeaways that will make the difference. And here are my two. Okay. All right. So number one, when you are working on creating any form of a program, The easiest thing you can do is instead of thinking on these crazy terms of, sometimes it gets confusing on like, am I doing a microcycle or a mesocycle or a meso or a macro or micro, whatever that is. And if you read any strength conditioning like books, it gets very complex. They're like, it's this periodization phase, and it's a specific of the specific preparation phase. It's the general of the general. It's hypertrophy was endurance. Is it power? Is it strength endurance? Is it strength power? Like they're like, how about I break it down into something simpler? Okay. And depending on where your setting is, you most likely aren't going to be generating full-on programs and updating every single microcycle for a year. And if you are, good for you. If you aren't, and you're like, I need something simple, this podcast is the place to be. Okay. So number one, instead of thinking it as a big macro cycle, and you don't have to break it down into like one big thing and then chop that down into meso and then into microcycles. Here's the way I look at it. Find your time point, and this is where the caveat is. You have to have somebody with the time point, a time to peak. For instance, somebody has a race in 4 months. That's the time to peak. That is when they need to be the fittest and strongest. Next, or the fastest, right? Next, then you work backwards. That is your macro cycle, 4 months. Okay. In every 4 of those months, now you can break those into 4-week blocks. And this is where the art of strength conditioning comes in. And think about this. When you are, let's say you're going to work out, right? And there's 4 phases to a workout. Some of us only do 2 of them. Here's what I mean. The first phase is the warm up. Some people still don't believe in them, still do them, whatever it is. I really don't care. It comes down to the warm up is kind of like I'm just going to get the blood flowing and I'm going to get things moving, right? I think we can all, like, before you go play soccer, you're going to like stretch your legs, maybe go for a jog or something. Call that the warm up. In a gym setting, you might, like, I don't know, go on a treadmill or bike, or I don't know, do some like calisthenics, whatever it is. And then that's the first phase, the warm up. And then the second phase is I'm going to do some really light weight, and I'm going to just get the tissue to understand the load that's about to happen right now. So you start with lightweight reps leading to whatever's coming up. Then the next phase is the heavy resistance. This is like your main lifts. You're going to I'm going to do bench press and squat so heavy. So first phase was warm up. Second phase was lightweight. Third phase was heavyweight. Fourth phase is the cool down. Like, if still people they'd still do that. I think a lot of people do. But the whole goal there is to drop the load, just get on like a cardio machine, just get the body to loosen up a little bit afterwards and decompress, maybe drop your heart rate, allow the tissues to settle down. And if you think about those 4 phases, that's the 4 phases in any strength conditioning base program. And the first phase is called the warm up, right? In the strength conditioning world, it might be called the general preparation phase, where this is where you're just getting the body to move. You're working on stability, mobility, good movement. So that's where most PTs are really good. This is our jam. This is where you're I could totally get the body prepped. That's my training. So this is where you're gonna go. Your volume's gonna be higher. So total amount of reps and sets are gonna be higher. Your intensity is going to be load, and you're not going to have very high intensity, there's no reason to. And your load might be moderate. This is the time to just move, right? You can start to develop that. So you can go low to mod. And when you start now, so you got the body warm, and we said that's a 4-week block, a 4-week time period. That's 1 month. That's January. Then the next month, we're going to go into something called specific preparation, or pre-competition, right? So this is where you're going to get the lighter weights, is where you're in the example of the gym, that's the lighter weights. But in the specific preparation, or the pre-comp phase of preseason, this is where you're going to start to change it, right? They're not drastically increasing their intensity as if they were in season, but they're going to increase their intensity in general. This is where the load is going to get higher, and the volume will start to drop. So they'll have to do lower sets, lower reps. They will also have higher load and higher intensity than in the last phase. So that's just like you're getting the specifics ready in the preseason, ready for competition. So next, all right, so now you're going into the competition phase. Think about this, right? Like, think about a baseball player, think about a soccer player, think about a tennis player. What do they need to be ready for? They need to be ready for speed. They need to be ready to rock and roll. They need to be like at their fittest, at their highest speed, and they're primed and ready. If that's the case, their intensity will be high during competition. We know that volume and intensity have an inverse relationship. So which means that if they're high intensity in competition, their volume has to drop. So what happens to the load? Let's think about this. So if their intensity is high, volume is low, you are probably going to start to drop the load as well. And the whole reason is you're working on getting them fast. You're working on getting them primed, which means that you're working on very quick plyometrics, short string. I always get tongue-tied with this. SSC, short stretching cycle. Sorry, but essentially you're decreasing the time the ground contact on the ground. So stretch shortening cycle. I did it. I finally did it. All right. So you're dropping that down. So which means that if your intensity is high and you want to decrease the total time on the ground, you're going to lower that load. So your volume is lower, your load is lower, your intensity is high. That's during competition. So in my example, that's kind of like the peak time points that you're building up everything that you need there. So then the last part is the cool down is what I mentioned. And then that's really like the off season. So you're doing lower intensity, lower load and, moderate volume. And this is where they can just go have, like, if they're a high school student, like go have fun, like go swim, go hike, go like do things that you like are fitness based, but are enjoyable, but not necessarily related to your sport, because it allows your tissues and tendons and joints to decompress from the specific stress that they have in season. So this is a time to just get some fitness in and just move before you get them ready again for the general preparation phase. So instead of seeing it as a super complex, a lot of complex terms, this is probably the easiest way to see this. Like this is the base fundamentals of any program. And it doesn't have to be rocket science, but at the very least, that foundation alone allows you to have better conversations with athletes. And I said this at my webinar that just because you take one class, like if you take a class or a semester in college or high school, or even now, if you take a class in like Spanish or French or I don't know, German, learning one semester or class in a specific language doesn't make you fluent. But now you can understand a little bit, which makes you like more prepped for anything moving forward. And that's what I feel like CEU courses and those things like that. Like my course this week in the summit is going to be fantastic for people who want to learn how to speak the language. I want to know more. Like I hear people talk about it and I want to be able to talk about it with my athletes, even kickstart designing actual programs, get them ready and do more than just getting them out of pain. Because if you think about this, physical therapists are really good at the general preparation phase. We're really good at getting their movement great and their stability great. If they skip the specific preparation phase or the pre-competition phase, what are they missing? The strength development over time. So physical therapists will typically do general preparation, and once they're pain-free, we send them back to competition. And the challenge is you miss this gap of time where you could have developed the strength. And think about a post-op ACL, maybe 9-10 months, right? You've got them out of pain for sure. You've built some plyos, but did you build a strength base that will get the tissues, tendons, and muscle around stronger to endure what is about to happen during the preseason or pre-competition or competition? And a lot of times that's not the case. We'll work on like plyos and get everything ready, but we're not adding like 8 weeks of pure hypertrophy, strength endurance. And that's maybe because we don't have the time, but then also because we don't have the skill. And I think when we put people from a general preparation phase into sport, I think we're doing them a disservice. I think some people, I hear this often, like, I can get you better in one visit and I'll get you back into sport. I'll get you back in the gym. And I think that's great. I think there's really skillful clinicians that probably could do that. And I think they're amazing. And I think there's an art then on getting not just pain-free, but even more resilient or stronger for the actual sport. And there's a very different role there. And I think that clinicians, PTs, are great at getting pain-free. I want to develop and work with PTs who want to get them stronger, thicker, more resilient, so they're not injured in their sport. And most of us would call that the gap between rehab and performance. And that gap primarily is a specific preparation phase and a preseason phase. And we're not here to teach people skill. That's not our jam. Like, we're not here to do that. I'm not a soccer coach. I'm not a tennis coach. And I'm not a strength coach that develops strength programs every single day, day in, day out, hour by hour. I'm a physical therapist who happens to understand acute injury management, who's worked with and been trained by amazing athletic trainers who are artists and masters of their craft. I'm a physical therapist who has worked in sports settings to manage people all day long for weeks on end, for years, to get them ready for a preparation. I'm a physical therapist who understands strength and conditioning, so I can help and work with strength and conditioning coaches who design things like a boss. And I'm here to adjust them because I can understand we're speaking the same language. I understand the language, so I can adjust things based on the parameters, where they are in the season, and the timeline backwards to get them back to sport. That's the physical therapist that I am. I am not a strength coach. I am not a skill coach. I'm not an athletic trainer. I'm not a massage therapist. I am a physical therapist who understands how to speak other people's languages. And I'm kind of like Switzerland. I just like to be in the middle, and like, I'm here to support whoever comes at me and needs my help. And that's always been my vision. That's always been who I am as a clinician. That's, you ask an athlete, they'll be like, oh, he'll fight like tooth and nail for you. He'll work with anybody who you need to make sure that you're primed and ready. I like to be able to transition them safely into wherever they need to go. And I don't, I most people will try and claim that they're the best at everything, and it's very difficult. I like to be 80% at everything, and I can just like roll with the punches. And that's the framework that I teach on strength and conditioning, that if just understand the framework first, get to learn the language, and if you want to be fluent on that, go for it, go that direction. But it's not going to happen overnight. I think you have to build enough programs, see enough scenarios. The challenge is, physical therapists, we want to repair tissues. On the strength conditioning side, we want to destroy the tissue. And it's really hard to play that gray zone and being able to like switch mindsets and say, this athlete is uninjured and I need to develop the tissue stronger. This one's injured. I need to build the tissue up enough that it can now be broken down. And then I know how to transition them into a strength conditioning program to build a general preparation phase for 6 to 8 weeks, to build a specific preparation phase for 6 weeks, a preseason phase for 6 weeks, and then a competition phase, and maintain them at a high level, at high intensity, to be able to like keep them in their sport without coming back to me for pain. That is the art, and that's my dream, is to have clinicians who understand that. And there's a lot of sports programs, sports courses, residencies, and everything else. But truly, if you understand the spectrum, everything else is irrelevant or low priority. Like exercise selection, rest times, tempo, all that is irrelevant if you can learn what a year looks like, work backwards, figure that out, work with a strength coach, get support, find mentorship, but really understand the year. And that's really what my Strength Summit is about. So for those of you going, that's a little teaser. I'm excited to have you in there. All right, so that was number one. So understanding the phases of a strength cycle are not just like a macrocycle, a mesocycle, and a microcycle. You can think of them in terms of, a warm-up, a lightweight, heavyweight, and a cooldown. I hope that helps. And then number two is that intensity and volume. Okay, let's talk about this. So intensity and volume. If we look at volume, it's the number of reps and sets given a given workout or week, right? Like, how much volume did you do? And in bodybuilding, that volume could be high, right? So in other sports, it might be low. It depends on the season, depends on the sport. Now, if we have high intensity, what I mean by intensity, it's like perceived effort, percent of a 1 rep max, heart rate relative to intensity. So intensity is a percent of effort, a percent of amount of work, metabolic work. So in a 1 rep max, if you think of your bench press and you do 95% of that. So if my bench press is 200 pounds, 95% of that is 190. That's high intensity. That's a lot. That's a large percent relative to where I'm at. Then at 190 pounds, can I do a lot of volume of that or low volume? Low volume. Naturally, like if I can only like do that one time, I'm not going to be able to do a lot of reps. And you're not going to want to over fatigue me. That won't last over a lot of sets. So my sets and reps will drop to accommodate the higher intensity or the higher percentage. So we can safely say that volume and intensity are inversely related. If you have high intensity, you likely have low volume. So if that's the case, somebody asked the question, what if they're in season and they're working with a strength coach and they're in season? So we said intensity is high in season and we want to maintain that. So as a physical therapist, how do I adjust for somebody who has back pain, who is a soccer player, and back squatting is important for them, or um, a load with split squats, or split squat jumps, or deadlifts, trap bar deadlifts, whatever it is. Now, that question comes in like, well, what do I modify first? Do I adjust the load, the volume, or the intensity? What's the goal of the phase? Competition is increased intensity. So I have to maintain the intensity high. So intensity is high. My volume's already low. So what are you going to adjust? My load. Drop the load. Because if the coach is telling me, hey, Chris, I need them to be fast, I can't lose the intensity. Well, then what are my two options? Volume and load. My volume's already as low as can be. I need to keep my intensity high. So what's my variable? Change the load. So between those three variables, you have to be able to adjust that. As a physical therapist, we immediately go to like, whoa, slow them down, less reps, low load, and low intensity. You have to understand the athlete and coach have a different need, and that's where you can turn the dials on all three of those variables. Now, let's say in off season, they're having that same back pain. What's the goal in off season? Definitely not to have high intensity. It's let's build the volume before we build the load. So higher volume is the goal. And if they have back pain, so drop the load, drop the intensity, build the volume so it still allows them. What's the goal of the off season? Or off season to general preparation. Just build resilience, just get the movement going, like just get their tissues prepped and ready to rock and roll for this physical preparation phase and general preparation phase. So what is the goal of each phase? You have to ask that. So if you can understand like, okay, well, now you have to know what phase of the season are you in? Off season. Okay, then I know it's lower priority to do intensity. Are you in general preparation phase? Yeah. Okay, so now I know that it's lower intensity is not, the intensity is not the game, and your load is lower priority. It's volume. So as long as I can continue building volume, I can drop the load, drop the intensity of that back pain. Now you're speaking the language. Now strength coaches are like, oh, you're different. How did you know that? It's because I took Chris' Summit course, is what you should be saying. But I think that if you can understand, play those three variables in the season, that was somebody's takeaway. Like during the webinar, I asked, like, what, like out of all this, for those of you who attended, I appreciate you guys so much. It was a 2-hour webinar, turned into 3 hours because of the questions, and we started going into it and diving into it. So for those who stayed to the very end, yeah, it was a 3-hour webinar, and that one of the takeaways I asked was like, what was a big thing? And they said, understanding what variable I can play with in what phase. And that gives you so much power. That alone, like you can walk away from this podcast right now knowing that, oh my goodness, what I was missing was asking where in the season they are. So if they're in competition, most PTs will see people, their athletes in season, because that's when they're having the problem. So when people have problems, they're like desperate for a fast fix because they're like, I compete in 2 weeks. So it's very hard. You can't build strength. You can't go through like a full on like general preparation phase. You can't get their movement stability right. You can't even get them strong. So you need like 12 weeks before you can make some bigger changes. So in season, you're just repair mode. Like some PTs will be like, well, you should have done this, you should have done that. Like that's not the point. Don't make them feel bad. Help them understand. I'll get you out of this pain right now. Like I'm gonna just keep you like band-aids right now, and I'm okay doing that. But you need to understand, I'm gonna fix you fast. However, the where you're gonna get the most bang for your buck, and this doesn't happen again, is afterwards. I need you to take a week off, work on active recovery, go be a kid, do whatever it is, and then for 4 to 6 weeks, we're gonna work on good mobility, good stability, get you all cleaned up. After that, we're gonna go for 6 to 8 weeks of a specific or general preparation, a specific preparation phase, get you strong, get these things more resilient. And as you get back into soccer, I'll help you with this specific preparation phase into preseason to get you powerful, to help you understand like when you should be doing plyos, when you can start to increase intensity. But that doesn't happen unless you have a really good base of strength in the general and specific preparation phase. So you can't jump from pain-free to comp. It's not possible. It sets people up for failure. So the next time you see somebody who says like, well, I can get them better pain-free in 3 days or in 3 weeks, tell them you're actually doing a disservice because you're putting them back in sport and you're just being the band-aid. Long term, I need to bring you back into the office and get you strong for 12 weeks. And that's where I say, like a lot of people, I said there's 4 different people listening to this in that sense, and not even where you are professionally, it's like the setting you work in. For some people, it's like, man, I just wish that we can do a wellness program for, like, people have been asking for it, but we don't have anybody to do it and we don't know how to sell it. And that term turns people off a lot of times. How do we even offer it, right? I think really what it comes down to is helping people understand what is needed for the requirements. Just like you, and I'm doing this podcast, people like they're attracted to education. And so when you educate your staff and you educate your team members, educate your clients, your patients, your athletes, they love knowing why you would do it and why it would benefit them. So you would almost have to pre-template this and show people what a 4 to 6 week block of general preparation is, a little 6 to 8 week block of specific preparation, and a 6 to 8 week block of strength, power, and power endurance looks like pre-season or pre-going into their comp. And what they can kind of see that, and what you're doing is you're adding value to just pain-free services. And for some of you, you're like, I've always wanted to do that. Like, I just didn't know how to communicate that. And what you have to understand is you have to understand the blocks first before you can deliver it. So you need to educate yourself. It's a skill set based problem first, going into now being able to deliver something different. So those are my 2 points. I wanted to talk about number one, that you don't have to make it complicated. Just know where they are in the which phase they're in. And then number two, you modify intensity, volume, and load based on where they are accordingly. And so that is an easier answer to, well, how do I fix their pain? How much time do you have, and what's the overall goal? It's no longer about knee pain. The knee pain is irrelevant. Foot pain, back pain is irrelevant. Who cares? I just need to know what's the target. How many weeks back do I have to go in order to get you back in the game? So to me, that's really 2 ways to simplify a strength and conditioning program for athletes. Those 2 key points are critical. It's the things that people are telling me that they are learning from. So for those attending my summit course this weekend, that's a taste of what you're going to get. Ultimately, it's really about learning the framework first, learning which variables to modify first, the approximate percentages that you'll use in each phase, and then you can insert whatever exercise you want to do inside that skeleton, and that helps people the most. So wherever you are on this planet, and in your phase of like developing you as a professional, That is how you add strength conditioning on top of your current skill set, add more tools to your toolbox. More importantly, add it to the spectrum of services that you can provide. If you can do acute injury management and you can be a great physical therapist in the outpatient setting and you can provide strength conditioning, you are unstoppable. You are truly unstoppable. The next thing after that is understanding how to communicate the value of that. And that is an art in itself. And being honest and transparent is super big on that. I'll do a podcast on how I deliver the message. And that's really critical because there's three parts to delivering any form of value to anybody. Number one, it has to be the right person, it has to fit. Number two, it has to be the right time of delivery, and then it has to be the right message. And a lot of times we fail to understand those components on how to deliver a strength conditioning program for somebody because they ultimately think it's like, oh, well, you were trying to offer it because I'm now pain free and you want me to, no, this is like for you. And that's really what it comes down to. So I hope that helps wherever you are. Send me an email. Let me know if you have any questions about it. But I will have another upcoming webinar. I have a course coming up September 17th and 18th. If you guys are interested, it is my foundations course. It is everything about return to sport, getting an athlete back to sport, not just this is now in a short timeline. How do I get somebody back to sport and accelerate that process? Not even, it's the people who can't even get stronger. You don't have that thing. It's how do I get somebody better? They give you a 3-week timeline. What is the exact sequence of events that needs to happen for you to get that? So that's my return to sport. My athlete return to sport course, that's the foundational component of timelines and getting people back. So if that's interesting to you, be on the lookout. Make sure you're on my mailing list. I send out weekly emails on just updates on these type of things. I might turn this podcast into an email, but I hope that helps. I hope to see you at the course, and I hope you guys are crushing it in life and enjoying this amazing journey that we're on, and I'm excited to be part of it. So I will see you guys on the next episode. Take care.